8.
You're watching the Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
So I want to talk about the word bifurcation, which is this idea of splitting something in half, or in more than half, or in any number of ways that you can split something. And the way it's most commonly presented in the world in which we're living today is bifurcating your audience, which is to say, taking part of your audience and distracting them with something over here, like being live on Instagram, while you're doing something over here, like being live on YouTube. I'm talking to you, the NFL, and so many other people, and thinking that because you've done this, the overall is going to be more, when in fact you get less. Now, Kyle, why are you talking about this thing that most people know about as the way a snake's tongue is forked? I will tell you. What happens when you bifurcate your audience, or bifurcate anything really, is you get what they call skewed data. Your numbers look a certain way, but are not actually reflective of the actuality in which you're living. And so now you're real confused about what the hell I'm talking about, right? When we look at data anywhere, when we look at information put out anywhere, we as humans have to try to distill that data down into something we will understand. And the more complex you make that data by splitting your data, by splitting your audience, by segmenting the population, the harder it is to get clear and concise data. Is there such thing as too much data? Is there such thing as knowing too much? Is there such thing as trying too hard? Find out. This is Devil's Advocates. What's up, everybody? Welcome in.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Hope everybody's having a good night. Thanks for joining us here on this episode of Devil's Advocates. We are back. We were off last week. Sorry you missed us, but we are back now. Well, we're mostly back.
Define the word back.
Yeah, we're present. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have a fun show. Cool topic. I'm glad that Kyle brought this one up and brought it to our attention.
I mean, it's something that I've been having to really stew on and live with for a while. This idea of information overload and what is and isn't an appropriate amount of information, and how should information be disseminated. And then again, moreover than just that, how should data be broken down as it relates to the things we all care about?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in more data, but the problem with more data is data itself is very dangerous.
Yep.
Because you can interpret it different ways. You have to make sure that you're analyzing that data in context and without bias.
Right. Data is fallible.
Yeah.
So should I frame up the question first, or should I tell the backstory as to how we got here first?
I think let's start with the backstory, because anytime I do one of these, somebody always wants to know, like, well, what's the point here? Why are we talking about this? So
Sure.
I like backstory.
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, one of the most successful retailers in one of the most successful direct market comic book retailers in the country wrote a not so, I'm going to call it an open letter, but it wasn't really an open letter, to comic book publishers and the industry as a whole, where they, amongst other things, decried publishing practices, distribution practices, belief systems of creators, concepts that are being presented in comic books, many, many things that we've actually already talked about on this show.
Mm-hmm.
Are comics too political? Are comics is our comics in trouble? Is the distribution model, like things like that? He decried a lot of the existing way the industry is functioning right now.
Right.
And that letter was sent directly to many of the major publishers, all of the major distributors, was posted in a private retailer forum, and was published by ICV2. And this is where the story takes on a life of its own. Because had that letter just gone those places and been confined to the existence things going to those places had been confined to for years, that's where the story would end. But it didn't. The ICV2 story was picked up by many other comic book news sites and reprinted and manipulated and pushed out to the public. So now some information about how this particular retailer stores were doing, the challenges this particular retailer saw towards the future, and this particular retailer's viewpoints on things were spit out to the public in a way that it was never intended.
And Round Guy, this is what we're going over right now.
This is what we're going to. So I'm telling the story, and then we're going to frame up the topic, Round Guy.
Yeah.
So this information goes out in a way that was never intended. And the public, and by the public, I mean people in the industry and people outside of the industry, collectors, fans, and even people who are not collectors and fans, but who are involved in comics, convention promoters, artists, creators, all of these people see this article going around and start to scream, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
And all of these big debates have sprouted out of this about the future of comics and what's hurting comics and how can comics recover and can comics recover and how do we save such and such. And most of it is a result most of this as a result of the speculation that's happening beyond the initial group that this data was intended for, this information was intended for, is based on a misrepresentation of what this retailer was saying. Because, again, it's been the game of telephone. And so it got me thinking, is data and is information subject? And what I mean by that is there data that needs to be kept from the public? Or should, as Plato said, all information flow into the boulevard? The more everyone knows, the better everyone else is. The better everyone is off. And it got me thinking back to when I first got into broadcasting. So the topic of tonight, Round Guy, to answer your question is, can you know too much? And what responsibility is there to distill data before you send it out or before you articulate it so that when it does get misconstrued, your point doesn't get missed? When I first started in broadcasting, we would get a book about this thick every quarter with something called the Arbitron numbers. Arbitron wound up getting bought out by Nielsen. If you guys remember the Nielsen boxes and Nielsen ratings, Arbitron was how you measured who listens to what radio station and for how long. And what we had to do and the way the world worked was we would get this book and the data in it made no sense to anyone who hadn't been trained in radio broadcast data analytics, right? It would say you get a 20 18 to 35, 1700 to 2200. And if
Sweet.
you look at what it means, right? What that would mean is you had a 20 share in the age range of 18 to 35 from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. So then you could go to advertisers and say, okay, if you're trying to advertise to males 18 to 35, I have 20 out of every 100 people listening to the radio listening to this show between 7 and 11 p.m. I had to distill that data down for other people. Now, all that stuff's just on the internet. And it creates some problems because people take this data and misinterpret it, misread it, do whatever they want, and it's actually causing. I like the "you're next" and the "no bull."
Yeah.
Anyway.
He's a good dude.
Yeah. Anyway, so what you wind up happening is people are making decisions based on inaccurate and inadequate information because they don't know what they're looking at. So when we talk about the comic book industry, we talk about sales data, we talk about publication data, we talk about all this kind of stuff. It used to be that data would get distilled down by Diamond and put out in a way that the public could understand. Now, because Diamond doesn't handle everything anymore, the data is bifurcated. Like we talked about at the beginning of the show, it's split. There's data coming in from Lunar. There's data coming in from Diamond. There's data coming in from Penguin Random House. There's data coming in from Simon & Schuster. There's data coming in from the direct from publisher sales, right? If a publisher deals direct with retail stores, that data all comes in, and there's no one to distill it down for the comic book industry.
Yep.
In the book market, you have BookScan, which does that, but we don't have anything. And so a retailer like this big retailer can write this piece, write this think piece, write this screed, in my opinion, on the comic book industry. And there's no way to get data and present it to say this is incorrect or this is correct. And at the same time, people are reading one retailer's opinion and thinking he speaks for the whole industry.
Well, and just to not to cut you off completely, but I do want to jump in here because I think there's a very important part of that we got to frame all this through, in my opinion. We talked about it with the, does the comic book industry need saving topic that we had a while ago. And, people may not have caught that show. So just to kind of talk about it, there is this notion, and it's a prevalent notion. If you talk to a lot of collectors, even a lot of retailers, some creators, that certain things are maybe bleaker than they may be in reality. But the problem is that you have a retailer making a comment like what we're going to talk about here, and that elevates, that signal boosts that idea, that concept. And what Kyle's saying is, without the context around what those numbers mean, or even fact checking, or even distilling, or any of those things, or even without, most of us don't have the ability to go independently check these numbers because we don't have access to these numbers. They're not posted. Right. And so when you have that situation, you enter this area where, when we're in a generation that reads headlines and moves on, this is going to be a headline and a bullet point and a data point that you see in certain arguments for a long time as a cap and the feather of, told you comics are dying because of A, B, C, and D.
Right.
So.
No, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. So the question I wanted to tackle tonight is, what role should unfiltered data be playing in our position as collectors? Right? Because that's what we're looking at. That's how we're approaching this, right? Like, I know what role unfiltered data plays in my role as a comic book broadcaster, or as a retailer, or as someone who works with the direct market. I know that answer. But what role should unfiltered data play to the average common person? Is there such thing as good data and bad data? Is there such thing as too much data or too little data?
Yeah. And
I'll give you another example that came up in my life today.
okay.
And so a friend of mine who I've been friends with for 20 years, and I probably won't speak for a month after this. They were on social media decrying the downfall of Disney because the Marvels didn't perform at a good level based on previous data. Now, nowhere in the article they shared did it say what data they were comparing the Marvels numbers to.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere in the article they shared did it say this is what Disney has listed as defining as success for this movie. Nowhere did it say this is what we would expect based on extrapolations from this year's releases. There was no framing other than, gee, a bunch of people went to see it the first weekend who didn't, and a bunch of people didn't go see it the second weekend. Well, duh. What are you going to do? Go see it twice? It's a good movie. It ain't that good.
Also, let me guess this article probably didn't include any of the context of how well superhero movies have been doing in the SAG-AFTRA strike period, where actors couldn't promote their films, which is a big part of superhero films. Yeah.
Right. No, nothing. And he just goes, see, this is why activist investors are lining up to strip mine Disney. Because they don't want the woke culture. Like, no, you are forming an opinion based on inaccurate, partial data. You're wrong. And, oh, by the way, you can't define success for someone else. So it used to be that these companies, Disney, Warner Brothers, all these companies, would have investor meetings where they would give basically the raw data to their investors. And what that data is it's data on their viewership, on their spending, on everything, given to the people who have given them financial reason to have the unaltered, undoctored data. What up, Luis? Those people... Okay, just as an aside, I keep looking over because my insulin pump is going crazy. It hasn't vibrated all day, but we go live, and in the first 20 minutes, it vibrates 8 times.
That just gives you an idea of how this topic is affecting Kyle's metabolism.
It's true, man. It's true.
And I just want to
also
point out
the
one
fact
other
that
thing.
I haven't eaten dinner yet.
Well, that plays into it, of course. I want to point out one other thing too. There are a couple great comments. What you can do in the way that we're doing this format, if you don't know, we can save those comments for later. If you type out a longer, more substantial comment, and I'm just going to flash them real fast because I don't want you to think we're ignoring you. We're going to get back to these comments because I have them starred, which means I can bring them back up at any time. And I just don't want people to think we're ignoring those comments. We're just having this conversation, and when it's applicable, we'll throw those comments in and discuss those. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm absolutely going to open the phone lines tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Mainly because that's all hooked back up now.
It's a good reason. So, if you guys are itching to talk about this topic.
Yeah, after my vacation, it wasn't hooked up for a couple weeks. Anyway.
So if you're itching to talk about this topic, keep that in mind. We'll have a chance for you to call into the show later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but they used to give this data to their investors, and those are people who have a fiduciary responsibility in these companies, which is they're getting money paid out based on the revenue of these companies, or they're putting money in to see certain things done at these companies. And so they have a different way of looking at the actions of these companies than we do.
Yeah.
We get all worked up when they cancel Batgirl because we wanted to see the Batgirl movie. But the investors in the investor meeting are happy it was canceled because it means they don't have to take another hit of spending another $1 billion to market the movie. Right? It means their bottom line is higher. And so what used to happen with this data is it would go to them, and then these companies would hire PR firms or whoever to distill the data and put it out to the public. And you would say, oh, well, Disney made 17% more this quarter than last quarter. And that's what you'd find out. You wouldn't find out that they made 17% more because, well, they decided not to put out 3 movies that they were slated to put out. Or you wouldn't find out that their profit projections for next quarter are higher because they don't have to pay scab workers to cross picket lines, or they don't have to, their profits for next quarter are higher because, I don't know, the strike is over and they're going to be able to make content. None of that was there.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't necessarily matter to us. Why the numbers are there, just the numbers were there. So it brings me back to that question, and it's the question I want to ask everybody. What role does data play in your collecting, in your in participation in this hobby? Does it?
Yeah.
And then
go ahead.
Once you establish that, how do you approach looking at the data, looking at the information that's put out? So, Bronze, do you have an answer to that question? What role does information play and data play in your collection, in your collecting?
Yeah, I do. So, man, it is a really dense topic too. So data is very important. And, I don't often talk about things I do outside of work. Hey, how's it going, Sean? Love to see you here. Outside of the work here we do on YouTube. But one of the things I used to do, my previous job, I was a data analyst. So I like data. But being a data analyst, I can tell you that having data it's useful depending on what you do with it and how accurate it is, because there is bad data there. And here's a great example of that. I see people talking about sales numbers for comic books that frankly don't know what the sales numbers of comic books are, but they think they do because they think they saw a number somewhere that's accurate.
Right.
And that number that's out there could tell you a partial picture, but it's a picture in a vacuum. So that's an example. And what does that do? That creates this issue where if you don't have the complete picture, it's a real problem. Here's another really good example. Because of the research I do for a video series I make on my channel and just some of the stuff that's interesting to me about the comic book collecting hobby, I look up a lot of values on comic books. And I do this for a regular series I make. And I go to comicspriceguide.com. I go to Cover Price. I go to Go Collect. I go to Overstreet Access. I go to eBay sold listings, GPA analysis, all these places that collect data. And I'll tell you, if I went to just one of those places, and that's where I got my information, I would have a very incomplete picture of what the value of a comic book is compared to the way that I'm doing it. And there's other ways to do it too, because here's a secret for you. That is not all the sales data, even checking those, 5 or 6 sources that there is for a comic book, because it doesn't factor in, I don't know, local comic book shop sales for the most part. I mean, it does to an extent. Overstreet has some advisors. There is a little bit of that with Cover Price. But for the vast majority of local comic book store sales, it's not being contributed to that. Also, things like, Whatnot, things like live selling platforms, IG Live, IG sales, face-to-face collector sales and trades. All those things aren't factored into that. So to pretend like you have all the sales data, you don't. No one does. But you can know that you have this slice of the pie of what is being represented. And that can be a very large slice, depending on how many sources you use. It can be a very narrow slice. And I'm going to tell you something, as a guy who likes pie, big slices are better in that specific example. There are, however, examples where you're going to want that very specific cross section of data, and you're not going to want to muddy it with all the data that's out there on the topic. And that's where the analysis of that data comes into play. So I love the data. I also hate the data. And here's why. It's because of some of what Kyle is alluding to as the danger of this, is that if people go out with this information, it can inform opinions that frankly are incorrect. The sales numbers, the ticket sales numbers for a movie. Hey, what's up, Travis? There you go. You can't argue with that. But I love cheap comments.
It's the dad joke negotiating method. Well, it says 20 cents. I'll give you 20 cents.
Right on there. 10 center all day long. I love those ones. 10 for $1. Yeah, I mean, and exactly. I'm sorry. Yeah. We're fighting to try to highlight that comment.
Same.
Yeah. You're not going to get no. This is a food podcast disguised as a comic book podcast. But yeah, that data collection is very important. How you collect it, what kind of data you're using, how the people that are presenting the data interpret it, and how you're interpreting it. And Kyle mentioned the game of telephone earlier. That's several points of failure there too. But I think for that's the answer for me. And I'm going to take a guess that for the average collector, they're not necessarily thinking about the fact that they're interacting with data all the time.
Right.
Even in some cases, the average retailer. And I would say that's probably a little bit to their detriment, but it depends on how much you care about these things. And I would caution people to think about when you're dealing with numbers, do think about the source and think about what the context might be for those numbers. Especially when it comes to things like, particularly when it comes to unit sales for comics. I think that's a really hot button issue it's a talking point for a lot of different groups over the last couple of years.
Right.
Be careful.
And it's something that I've often had to remind people.
Yeah.
And I don't have to often remind people in the industry, but I have to remind people adjacent to it. When you see a figure of sales data saying that DC's sales are down or Marvel's sales are down, you have to look at several factors. One, the sales data they're reporting is not sell-through data. It's orders placed at distribution.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I have to fix my hat. Sorry, that was driving me nuts. For instance, there are books like Batman that you would say sales on Batman are down. But when you really look at the data, there are 6 Batman titles. And if you add all of the Batman together, sales are actually up for Batman. But what you don't know is what's leaving the local comic shop. We know that data reflects what's leaving distribution. So is Batman selling exactly the same as it was before? Or have they bifurcated the data? It's going to be the word of the day. Have they split the pool so many times that it looks like sales are down when they're not? Because the data isn't a direct representation of what we're trying to measure.
So, Kyle, let me ask you this. This is a super pointed question, and it's in this arena we're talking about. And I want your opinion.
Real quick, before you ask me that.
Yeah.
Phone lines are open.
And that's why I'm asking this, because I have a feeling some people might want to call in to address this one.
1-567-318-6507. 1-567-318-6507. We will put you right on the air with Bronze and I, and we can talk through this. What's your question?
Very much so. And this is why I want to bring this up, because I think this could be something that might want to call in and talk about. The question I'm going to put to you: why do you think publishers don't want sales numbers out there? Because obviously they could put them out there if they wanted to.
Oh, no, I don't think that's the case at all. I think publishers do want it out there.
So then how come they're not taking action to make that data public?
I think the problem is an administrative one. So the problem is that all Marvel cares about, or Disney, who owns Marvel, cares about is the total number of copies that sell.
Mm-hmm.
That's the total number of copies the distributor buys from them. Beyond that, they no longer care because they've gotten their money. Right? They've got the data they want, the sales data from distribution. How many were ordered? What matters to the rest of the world for the health of the industry is how many people are actually going into comic book shops and buying those books and taking them out of comic book shops. So
Yeah.
I think the problem isn't that publishers don't care. I think it's that distributors don't care. Because the publishers, the numbers we're getting are from the publishers. Boom Studios, we sold 100,000 copies of Berserker #1. They're not going to tell you that a third or more of those copies came back in returnability.
I thought they sold more than, like, didn't they sell a ridiculous amount?
I'm just throwing
Right.
a number out,
But
right?
I think that's the funny thing is it was probably, I think it was like between 500,000 and 1 million.
Yeah, it was.
But the real number
right,
had to be a fraction of that because it was returnable.
right. So let's just, we'll make it 1 million. So 500,000 copies come back returnable. We'll just say 50%. And I know it wasn't that high because I know plenty of retailers who are sitting on cases of that book because they know that that book will spike again when the interest in that book, if not the value as well, will spike again when the anime hits, when the live action hits, when the Keanu Reeves of it all happens.
Yeah.
Right? But that's the data we get is from the publisher.
Right.
The people who don't want the data going out there is the distributor because they don't want to say, oh, well, we're doing this, but only X number are selling from the retailer. Because now the distributor is going to have to carry that workload. Right?
Yeah.
Or retailers are going to have to go to one uniform POS sort of system, right? I think retailers would love to have the sales data out there saying, okay, we're actually selling just as many Batmans as we did before, but it's spread out over more Batman titles. There's a Batman title coming out this week. Batman Off-World #1. That's just another Batman title. Well, that is going to further segment your audience. And so I think retailers would love to be able to say, look, we're selling just as many. We're just splitting it up more. Or we're actually selling less. Or we're actually selling more. This is the state of the industry. And what's happening is there's no centralized point where all the data can reflect. Because every retailer picks a POS that works for them and a reporting software that works for them. Every distributor has a different methodology for counting and measuring. And every publisher has different goals. And so there is no one uniform set of data. So I think the answer is really, it's not that there's anyone who doesn't want the data out there.
Yeah.
I think it's that no one wants to be considered the centralized point for all of it. Now, there's a company in the book market called BookScan. And what BookScan does is it counts sales of everything that comes out of a traditional retail bookstore. And that includes your Targets, Walmarts, whatever, that sell books. Anytime that QR or that that UPC code on a book is scanned anywhere, it's counted, except in the comic book direct market. So if I start carrying John Grisham books in my comic book store, if I don't subscribe to the BookScan system, they wouldn't count me. But I would be, if I wanted to order from some of these book distributors, forced to sign up for BookScan.
Right.
So that they can count. And that's fair. That's part of the system. And no one wants to establish it in comics. And at the same time, I mean, I've been talking to Miss Jen. She's going through a process right now where I can answer that question in a second, Frog Brawler. She's going through a process where she's reevaluating her POS system. Her point of sale system is different than the point of sale system that my local comic shop uses. Is different than the point of sale system that the next closest comic shop uses, and the next closest. When I bought my store in 2017, do you know what we used to count sales?
Pen and paper?
Microsoft Excel.
Okay, close enough.
And that was after a pen and paper. Like, we were...
That's common, by the way.
Yeah,
Still.
we were counting books by hand every week and writing them down on a piece of paper. And then I was having to go in and input that data into Excel just so I could say, okay, this month versus last month on X title.
Yeah.
This month versus last month on X title. And it took me 3 years to build an inventory system that would count for me. Because the previous owner didn't care about data in the same way I did.
Yeah.
The data they cared about was, am I making enough money to pay my bills? And the data I cared about was, am I buying the right amount of stuff so I'm saving enough money to make my bills?
It's everything between having a P&L and managing your P&L.
Right.
So I actually have a pointed question for you because I have a feeling and I just realized I don't know. I don't know a lot of things, but in this particular example, we're talking about the returnability of books a little bit. I know it's not the focus of the show, but I'm curious, when a retailer sends their books back to the distributor because those extra quantity were returnable and they're eligible, who does the publisher get involved again at that point, or is it all at the distributor level? Are they required to destroy those books? Like, does Marvel care because then they're hearing back about the return number?
It depends on the publisher. It depends on the book. It depends on the deal.
Okay. Is there a general rule of thumb though?
No.
Okay.
So in the old days, and this is the old days of 2018.
Before the dark times.
Back when I was a kid, what you had to do was you had to tear the covers off of the books and put them in an envelope and mail them back to Diamond in the mail. Anyway.
Ew.
Right. So,
hey, Grandpa.
Especially with DC, the policy was a cover strip. So you would strip the cover off, throw them in an envelope, and send them back to Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
Then Diamond would just not pay DC for those books.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then I would, rather than getting any money back, I would get a credit on my bill.
Right.
So Boom had a little bit of a different policy. Boom said you didn't have to cover strip anything, but you had to fill out an affidavit, a legally binding affidavit saying this is how many you destroyed.
Gotcha.
Or Boom was also really cool at saying, this is how many I destroyed. This is how many I'm going to keep to give away for free. And this is how many I'm going to sell at less than cover.
Okay.
So what I could do on a book like, and I remember doing this on a book called Fence, which is a boombox book that is like fencing in that anime manga style. Buddy, that is a whole other demon.
But it's not entirely unrelated.
It's not entirely unrelated, and we can get to that, I suppose.
Yeah.
So what I did on Fence was I ordered a ton. I affidavit returned and destroyed 10 of the 30 I ordered. I sold 10, so I only had 10 left. So I kept 5 to give away for free, and I put 5 out for $1.
Okay.
Which is less than I paid for them. I put 5 out at a loss. And the whole idea was to get people reading more of the all ages Boom books. So I was willing to take the hit on that. It just was the way it worked.
Nice.
DC was always different. Marvel was always different. And then there were a lot of companies at the time who did no returnability.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own system. At one point, SourcePoint Press's system was mail us, go on our website, fill out this form of how many you're sending us. We'll send you an RMA label, and we'll cut you a check for what you paid for the books minus the cost of the RMA. And then you get a check in the mail, so you'd actually get your money back. But that was only if you ordered directly from SourcePoint, which was pretty nice. They don't do that anymore. And they shouldn't have done it to begin with. Like I told them, I go, this is bad news, guys. You shouldn't be doing this.
Sounds too good to be true, because it probably is.
Right. Don't send me a check. Just give me credit on my next order from you.
Yeah.
Keep them you're going to mess up your cash flow. And it did. So needless to say, returns are always kind of a mixed bag. I don't know now that like Lunar is around and PRH is more involved, if they've standardized some of that, because I'm not doing it anymore. But I know that's how it was back when I was doing it regular.
I want to completely off the cuff. I want to say that Penguin Random House has the affidavit method where you just vouch for. I could be wrong.
One thing I know PRH offers is 100% returnability on everything, but your discount is significantly lower. So if you don't take unlimited returnability, you get, say, a 60% discount off cover at your wholesale ordering. Whereas if you take full returnability, you only get a 40% discount. Or I don't know that, and I'm making those numbers up.
Yeah.
But I know that's something they offer because they offer it to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, whoever else. So
speaking of that, I think that now is a good time, unless you were right about to say something else. I think it might be a good time to... Yeah, let's dig into some of these comments. And there's some great ones in here. First one I'll bring up is the first one we talked about, which is that about 20 years ago, Frog Brawler had a manager tell them that assume that every email you write will be forwarded to someone that you don't want to see it. And this kind of goes to the where should information be shared, the availability of that information. And that actually is something that we haven't touched on too much, is the idea that this editorial that we're talking about that was on ICV2 isn't really something that should have been made wide. And I actually don't know the answer to this either. Do you know if that retailer intentionally had this published there, or was that something that they just picked up on their own?
ICV2 is, in some parts, still a members-only club. There are parts of ICV2 that you cannot read unless you are a retailer and are willing to pay their membership, right, to ICV2 to get this kind of information, to get this kind of data. Occasionally, what they'll do is they'll take something like this that should remain behind the paywall and put it in front of the paywall, right? It's the analogy I make to people all the time is that ICV2 is to comic book retailers and comic book business people what the Hollywood Reporter or Variety used to be to people in Hollywood. It used to be that unless you were working in the business, you never read Hollywood Reporter or Variety, because those were trade magazines.
Gotcha.
So the information was only relevant to people who were working. They've since changed their business model to be more public facing and more accessible. ICV2 has done the same because it's the only way to survive in the world.
Yeah.
But sometimes what happens when you do that is you take information that needs to be over there for a very specific group and you put it out for everybody. And that's where these mistakes come from, or these situations come from.
But I do think just kind of on the broader topic of almost loose lips will sink ships kind of, this is good advice that Frog Brawler's talking about that their manager gave them. Nothing is private on the internet.
Right.
And you do, I mean, it's not really the focus of what we're talking about tonight. But I think it's really good advice to really bring up. Assume your DMs can be screen capped or whatever at any time. And frankly, there's been a lot of that going on in the community recently. So I just point that out. It's a good piece of advice.
It's why I don't social media much.
And then Rail Guy, when we were talking about the authority on those numbers and where they come out, slippery question, who watches the watchers and who determines the watchers? And that is a good point too, because when you're talking about data and you're talking about being a good shepherd of data, and that's why I mentioned the bias, the motives of who is presenting that data. Nobody on this planet that would do that isn't going to have some sort of bias unless a bunch of people in the industry paid an independent organization to do this, which they wouldn't do, I wouldn't think. Maybe.
Well, that's kind of what BookScan is, right? It's also what Arbitron was and the Nielsen's are.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody pays them to compile the data so that we don't have to do it ourselves, and so that when we present our data, it's beyond reproach.
But the motive has to be there for everybody involved to want to make that system go. And which even if there's some desire there, we could say it's safe to say that it's not overwhelming because it hasn't happened yet. Whereas we know it could. I mean, we have the technology, we could build it.
Right.
Also from Round Guy, great comment. I do use some data, usually price, so I can plan for key purchases, when last sold, how many were potentially graded, average grades to expect. And this is, I think, for a lot of people watching, not all, but for a lot of people watching, this is the type of information that they're going to think about first, at least when they're thinking about data and how it's going to affect them. Just in my opinion, I think that's going to be what a lot of people are going to come up with. And it's why I mentioned the example where I use several different sources for pricing a comic book, because, let's put it this way, because I've seen this happen. If I was a less than reputable seller, I could do things like say, oh, I was just checking, X source. I won't pick on any particular one. And I can tell you the FMV is $2,000 on this book. But in a lot of cases, it's funny because then they'll talk about different places that they price their data. And if you look at those different sources, that number might be a little skewed, because really maybe 3 other sources say it's selling at 1,500 or 1,000, or that's one high sale that they found. Also, the same thing that can happen here, same kind of symptom of the same disease. It's selling for $2,000 on eBay right now. That is a semantics game. Do you mean it's listed for $2,000 on eBay and that's what they're selling it at? Or do you mean it's sold for $2,000 on eBay over the last 10 transactions? Because that latter is a much better data point than the random price that somebody put something up on eBay for, which could be anything.
Yes, you could charge whatever you want for stuff on eBay, by the way.
And people do.
Weird Al laid it all out in his song eBay. I'm just throwing it out there. And I will say this, and I've been very publicly anti one source of this data. And I will say it out loud here in a second. So if Bronze, I want you to distance yourself from what I'm about to say just in case it affects you. But it's why key collector is such a dangerous thing in our business.
All right, guys, I got to get out of here. No.
Well, right. I don't know if you work with them or not. So I don't want you to be painted with this or anybody else. This is my opinion on this. But they're incredibly dangerous because it's one point of data. And so many people will come into a comic book store or come up to a dealer at a convention or will start doing a deal, and they'll pull up Key Collector and say, this is what it's worth. And I can show you 9 or 10 other sources that would tell you something different.
I have so much to say right now.
So, like I said, I don't want to get into Key Collector or any of that kind of stuff. Like that's not my intent, but it's the point of so many people use that one single source for their data. I don't mind if you use it. It's a fine source, but use that and Go Collect and Comics Price Guide and eBay sold listings and get as many data points as you can and then cut your average.
Also, what I want to say about that real fast, and I don't want it to be like a huge tangent, but in talking about the accuracy of data, I agree that Key Collector is a fine jumping off point to begin your exploration. And what I mean by that, and people do this all the time. This is a super common thing, and I think it works very well at it. They have Key Collector open, they're digging through boxes, they're looking for things that are valuable, and so be it. That's how part of the world works these days. And it's very good at doing that. The problem is people don't understand, and this is where it gets a little weird. You can listen to Nick, the creator of Key Collector, literally tell you in live interviews, recorded interviews at this point, they're not a price guide. They're not having accurate price data. Also, people misunderstand what low, mid, and high means. Low, mid, and high does not mean low grade, mid grade, and high grade. It means average low sale, average mid sale, and average high sale, which is very confusing. But if we start looking at the numbers in that context, it makes a little more sense, because people look at that high number, and it's often like, let's say, I see this all the time, like a $35 comic book, $35 high, $12 mid. Well, that means that $35 is kind of the high watermark there for what that book would sell at in a raw grade. And again, it's not very accurate. That's not something you can really take to the bank. But that $12 number, from my general experience, which I look at it a lot, that's actually usually closer to what a raw FMV would be for like a decent high grade of that book. Anyways, that's an example of how data and what you know about the data and how you use it is going to affect the usefulness of it or the accuracy of it. Because a lot of people are looking at it, they're not interpreting that data correctly, and it's leading to disagreements about value of a book, misunderstandings about what it's worth, etc., like Kyle's talking about.
It's why I like Comics Price Guide, and Go Collect does the same thing, where they just straight up give you a list. Okay, if it's a 10.0, it's this. If it's a 9.8, it's this. If it's a 9.6, it's this. If it's a 9, boom, 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 boom. And you can say, okay, well, let's talk about the quality and not the value.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that original point. Is there such thing as too much data? And what Key Collector is doing in an effort to keep you coming back is presenting you with more data than you actually need in a way that is unclear, so that you're forced to then extrapolate their data in your real life to make a deal. And it forces you to keep coming back to them and saying, well, this is what this says. This is what this says. This is what I believe. This is how I'm focused. And it's the same reason that the news, when you watch a 24-hour news station, ends each segment with something terrifying. Do you know what's in your soup? Stay tuned after the commercials for what's in your soup. You stick through the commercials for reverse mortgages and you find out it's broth. And then they move on. That's a Mike Birbiglia joke that I stole. It's the same thing. So
yeah. Also, look, I'll say it. So Kyle doesn't get in potential deep water here. This also is a perfect example to talk about the bias that comes into play. So look, I'm not saying this is exactly what's happening. I'm just saying that this is a way it could be interpreted. This is my interpretation of some data. Key Collector, and it specifically refers to them. That same example I gave, the book is, whatever, $3 in low, $12 in mid, $35 in high. Well, what Key Collector really wants you to do is click that little eBay button. That's actually how they make money for the most part. They make money off memberships too. You click that eBay button, you go buy something on eBay, and they get a percentage of that purchase. So if that $35 number, if you're thinking, well, the Key Collector says it's a $35 book, if that's how you're interpreting that data, when you jump over to eBay and you see copies that are listed at maybe $25 or $30, you'll go, oh, that's a good deal. I should just buy that. So by the way, there's nothing wrong with Key Collector providing that service as an easy way to go buy the book in itself. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not making a judgment call there. I'm saying it's important to know what's being presented to you and why, or at least a potential reason why it could be presented to you. Right. It could just be that they're not an accurate price guide. But if you go off half-cocked with that information, you could end your, and I'm talking about $35 book. Imagine if it's a $3,500 book, right? So think about it at scale.
Right. So, all right, I want to hit some more of these comments and get into a little bit more, but we have to do a thing that we haven't had to do on this show in a long time. And that's twofold. We have to take a little commercial break for just a second. Like it's a 15-second commercial. But I also need to tell you guys, we are driving to the 2,500 subscriber mark here on The Experience. And if you guys could, if you are not already, I see some new names here. And I see some old names. If you haven't already, would you kindly click the subscribe button on our channel? And I'm going to say it, and it's going to sound dumb. I don't care if you don't really want to be subscribed. Click the button, because what you're going to do is unlock more content from the channel and the chance to win 1 in 25 variants coming up this very weekend during our Small Business Saturday sale. So, even if you're not into subscribing to YouTube channels, click the button, get us to that number, make the world better for everybody. And if you feel like it, if you like what Bronze and I are doing, you can call in. You could send us a super chat or a super sticker or a super whatevers. They have all of those options. Or you could just like send me money via like my private PayPal. But I'd rather you super chat. So do it that way. We're going to watch this real quick commercial break. We're going to take this real quick commercial break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to finish these comments and wrap up here, because I know Bronze has other things to do rather than stare at my ugly mug. And we will be right back after this commercial.
There's a comic book universe on the streets of Cleveland. Hero Tomorrow Comics is debuting
Violante, the Undead.
Get the new issue or the entire acclaimed library live on Kickstarter.
I'm coming for you, Cleveland.
Details at clevelandsuperhero.com.
Here next, they're not variant covers if you don't pay for them. If you win them for free, they don't count. So just so you guys know, and so you're all aware, we have some great new advertisers who are coming on board with The Experience. You haven't seen a lot of that from us before. Most of them are small, independent publishing houses, Kickstarters, self-publishers who are just trying to get their name out in front of y'all. So if you see an ad coming from us, just know that they're OGs with us. They've been around forever. They're our friends. And they're people who they're not the big guys. You're never going to see an ad for a Cullen Bunn book. Well, at least not for a while. But it's all going to be independent creators, people who are out there doing it on their own, trying to just keep the dream alive most of the time. So
you can't say never when it comes to Cullen Bunn, because eventually he'll write it.
Well, and eventually we will have bigger publishing houses advertising with us. But right now we're off the advertisers we're bringing on, small little niche community of independent and, self-publishers. So just know if you feel so compelled to click on those, click Kickstarters or go find those Kickstarters, we would appreciate it and they would appreciate it.
And then Sean, real fast, I know this isn't one of the start comments, but I know you work Saturdays. It's okay. You can bring your cell phone with you, turn down the volume, get a little earbud in there, kind of have the fun, because you're going to want to tune in. For one thing, I'm going to be on the show on Saturday. I'm going to be here. So that's a good reason to tune in. I know you like me for some reason. That's cool. I appreciate that.
We're going to do some simulcasting over on the Bronze Age Nerd channel.
Hell yeah. It's going to be for a good cause too. So I definitely recommend checking that out.
So, okay. Do we want to plug that? Because we can officially announce the time.
Okay, yeah. So real fast, I want to frame a couple things here for people. One thing I did last weekend on Saturday was Heroes for Heroes 2023. That's my charity auction drive. It's a fundraiser for a wonderful charity called Mission 22. They do a lot of things with veteran mental health and a primary focus on preventing veteran suicides. We have officially raised at this point over $4,000. We've raised $4,078. to the point where we passed our goal of $3,000 and have raised the goal to $5,500. And we are doing a supplemental auction with things like sketch covers from Trish Forstner. We're doing, I have 10 copies of Avengers Annual number 10, the first appearance of Rogue, that we're going to be, selling and auctioning up. Oh yeah. And some original Mirage TMNT books, courtesy of producer Kyle here. That's a number 1 right there for you, folks. So it's going to be an awesome event. This is part 2. Help us cross the new finish line. Mission 22 reached out to me. They were so excited about what we did. I got a glowing email from them. They're giving me all kinds of unfettered access and singing our praises of what we did. But work's not over. We can do more. And that's Small Business Saturday. It's right after Thanksgiving. It's a great time to do something, to give something back to people. And you can be part of it here on the EXP as well for Small Business Saturday and the drive to 2,500. If we get to 2,500, you got a chance to win some free comic books. And there's going to be giveaways, prizes, excellent deals, original art, all kinds of stuff. I've got Exo Man of War pages for sale. Those TMNT books you just saw, lots of cool stuff. And we can officially announce the time on Saturday.
8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific.
For all you West Coasters out there, that's how I'm going to remember it, because that's where I'm at.
And if you're in Newfoundland, 8:30 Eastern or 8:30 Newfoundland time.
Oh my God, are they off by half an hour?
Yes, they are.
Whoa, I did not know that. That's crazy.
Well, I'm only thinking about it because if we weren't doing the show on Saturday, that's where I was going to spend my weekend. Anyway.
Oh, there we go.
It was going to be a little vacation for the show. But anyway.
By the way, you can catch me on Nick's live art auction show on Friday. We'll be doing a little something for Heroes there. We'll be talking and previewing some of the items that are available. So even more reason to tune in, get another chance to maybe win something cool. I would check that out. Nick always has great shows with the original art. They're just absolute bangers. I won a John Romita Jr. ASM prelim cover for free just by being in the chat. Just showed up today, and that's awesome. So a lot of good reasons to tune in. Oh.
Hold on.
Oh, my.
New Mutants. Nottingham. Dark Wolverine. Hold on. The Nam.
But I want to see all those things.
The Flash. Where is it? Oh, I know where it's at. Hold on. I'd have to pull it up. Here, I'll just show you the Flash. Bought on Nick's original art show.
Nice.
I was gonna pull out the Romita Spider-Man page I have over here that I bought from Nick's original art show, but
was that Brett Booth? Who was that?
Norm Ratman and Brett Booth. Yep.
Oh, nice. Right on.
This is Flash 32, page 12.
I love Brett Booth.
I was at a hockey game when I bought it, Sean. That's how easy it is to buy stuff on the experience. So come to the show on Saturday with Bronze and I while you're at work. You don't actually have to be paying attention. You have to see the thing go up and claim. And you know it's money later.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. So yeah, we'd love to see you there Saturday. Kyle will be on for that show as well. I'll have he was in here earlier. He sold some original art last weekend, a really cool Baroness piece, a really cool Phoenix piece, Spider-Man sitting on a skull, really cool stuff. Big B McFly will be doing a live sketch and bringing some sketches. We might have more surprise guests working on it now, so definitely stay tuned. We had Comic Tropes on last Saturday. That was really cool. So check it out. We'd appreciate it.
Yes. So now that we've done the work,
yes,
let's get to let's get to our comments and kind of try and solve this question of, for those of you just joining us, how much data is too much data? What kind of data do you use when you collect? And should some data be kept from us? Is the big question I want to ask. Should we wait on data for it to be distilled to ways we can understand it? So, one of the things we talked about is sales of Batman, and that's where this comment came from. I kind of feel like having 6 Batman titles is a problem in itself. It is, but it doesn't actually. It only changes the data in that, again, like we talked about at the top of the show, it bifurcates the data. It splits.
Well, but I think primarily because that was right when we first started talking about it. It's probably actually Frog. If you did, I can't remember if you were there in that show, but we did a show. The premise of the title and the thumbnail was how many Wolverines is too many Wolverines? How many times did a character appear in multiple books?
Right.
And we talked about Batman in that one as well. So that's actually something we did cover in that episode. But I think that, we agreed that there is a sweet spot where having a couple titles with Batman in it, for example, makes a lot of sense. Maybe Batman and maybe Detective or whatever, Shadow of the Bat, whatever. But you get to a certain point, it's like, wait a minute, how much am I diluting the possibility of storytelling for this character where I could be telling those stories over a longer period of time and 2 titles or whatever? There's always a sweet spot there. So I think that you're not going to get much argument from us on that topic.
Right. But again, when we talk about data, it's important to know that having 6 Batman titles doesn't change the Batman data. It changes the Detective Comics data, or it changes the Batman title data. But that doesn't mean they're selling more or less Batman.
Yeah.
They're just selling it a different way. The word of the day, kids, is bifurcate. True.
The next thing, and I think this is a good one to talk about, probably relatively briefly, but Berserker is an interesting book to pick because a lot of those books sold on Kickstarter before they ever even went to comic book shops. So that's an interesting one as well.
I think the comic book store number was that number I gave of something like 100,000.
Yeah.
I think the Kickstarter number was the extrapolation beyond that, whether it be an additional 400 or whatever that wound up being. And then the other thing was with Berserker is they made the print run public. So there's a third piece of data out there that skews all of it. Right? So the print run may have been 500,000. They may have sold 300,000 between Kickstarter and retail direct market comic stores. Direct market comic stores might have bought or ordered 100,000 and then returned 50,000.
Yeah.
The breakdown of the data here, the important part is to talk about when you get to these astronomical numbers, the publishers are reporting the data they want you to have. And they want you to have that data because it lets them look successful.
It's also worth mentioning it works the other way too. So think about, there's these comics you hear about that have print runs or numbers of like 20,000. And if you think about what that final number might actually end up being, it may be significantly smaller.
Right.
In some cases.
Right. But then if companies don't offer returnability, whatever that number is just that number.
Right.
You have no idea how many are sitting in long boxes in dollar bins at stores.
Yeah, exactly. Your next had a kind of an interesting point here about Marvel and DC don't even care if their books make money. They just want to keep the market saturated for making cash on licensing fees and all the other goodies they produce. A very obvious extension of this thought process is seeding, comic book movies, although I wonder how much longer that's going to go on, because I think we are kind of seeing the diminishing returns on some of that, although IP is still very much an important part of media.
I think that's going to be a topic maybe for next week, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Comic movies. But what I will tell you is this year next. That is untrue.
Yeah.
They desperately care if their books make money. That's why you don't see long runs. It's why you only see short run titles anymore. 6, 8, 12 issues.
Yeah.
Right? They desperately care. Because just straight up, they're not making enough off the licensing, off of the other goodies to justify the losses that the publishing companies would take if they weren't at the very least breaking even.
Yeah.
They care that their books make money. They may not care so much about the profits.
Right.
As long as it's sustainable, they're making their money off of the licensing and the films and the toys and all that other stuff to be profitable. I think they're just keeping them alive so long as they pay for themselves.
And that's nothing new, by the way. I mean, think about the Star Wars model. The cross section of sales across all different types of content have been important for a very long time when it comes to these sorts of things. This is a great question. Is there a specific reason that Bookscan opted not to include comics? I have a feeling Kyle knows an answer.
I do, but only because I had to ask once. I had to stand up in a retailer meeting and look a fool to find out this answer, but I did. And the answer is simple. Every book that comes out has its own ISBN number, which is their UPC code. That is not true of comic books, except that it is in a different way. So when you look at a SKU code on the back of a comic book, there are 4 segments. The first one is the product code. The second one is the series code. The third one is, or the second one is the series code. Third one is volume. Fourth one is issue. So the first section is Batman. Second is single issue. Third is volume 37. Fourth is issue 1.
And cover C or whatever.
Right. So because every comic book is much the same and then small change, BookScan is only set up to read that first part. So it can't even scan the barcodes on comics. It's built to scan ISBNs, and comic books use UPCs. At Comics Pro last year at our trade organization meetings, there was a huge, massive meeting about this. And it was hysterical. If you had been there, you'd have seen me running around like a chicken with my head cut off with a microphone, sticking it in people's faces as they tried to talk. Because that was my job at Comics Pro this year. It'll be my job at Comics Pro next year, ironically. It's a fun job.
Nice.
But the comic books are working on it. Unfortunately, because of the way the industry has functioned for so long, they're way behind. It's a different way that book publishers think about their product inventory than comic book publishers. And that's it. That's the real answer, I guess. So, okay.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I get that this was what you were saying when we were talking about Key Collector. Just know that BookScan exists in one world and comic books exist in another for now, but they're working on it. They're coming together. It's just a matter of getting standardized data. Okay. Lots of examples of companies making money off easy. Tide Pods are horrible for your machines, but they sell by the millions. Well, so is using hot water in your machines, round guy. But people still do it.
Not me.
Right. I don't either because I'm fat, and if you use hot water, your clothes shrink.
That's right.
But the real of that is in this way, these companies are all making money. And the
Don't
data,
do it, Frog. Don't do it.
The data that they're presenting is to build up that profitability. Where we get out of line as fans is when we take data that is meant to highlight either profitability or loss or change of direction or anything and mistake it for success or failure. Right? I'll give an example from my own life this week. The Marvels came out and it had a huge drop off the second weekend. But we don't know what Disney considered success for that movie. We don't know what Disney considered failure. So all we're doing is looking at data that we haven't interpreted through the lens of what Disney is or isn't interested in. And we're saying, oh, this movie was a failure. Meanwhile, here it is, the highest grossing movie ever directed by a black female. Highest grossing movie ever with a black female leading actor. A movie that introduced huge, incredibly profitable parts of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that will be coming. Setting up the future. So we're looking at data thinking it's empirical, and it's not.
Yep.
Because there's so much more that goes into interpreting data than just numbers.
Like, what if I told you that, and this is totally hypothetical. I can't say this is true one way or the other, but what if I told you that Disney, understanding the conditions that film was going to come out under, and the state of what the industry was in, expected this to be a huge digital streaming option for Disney Plus at X date down the road, and they were willing to accept that that's going to be the reality of the situation. That may not be the case, but it might be. We really don't know. And it's not like Disney is going to be out there really talking about it too much unless they have a reason to do that. And without that information, it's kind of fruitless. Like what is your logic if you're of that camp? Like you're saying, like, well, watch, they're not going to make any more MCU movies. They will. Pretty safe bet they will, especially now. So, of course it could have ramifications. Of course they could have thought it was a huge failure in their eyes, but we don't know.
Yeah, you have no way of knowing. So a big part of this data question is that no one can define success for anyone else. No one can tell me what my data means to me unless I give them the parameters to measure it in. So Bronze is a data analyst. If I send him all the data for the EXP, all the YouTube data, Bronze can break the numbers down. And because he has experience with YouTube, he knows what that data means. But he can't tell me if I'm successful or unsuccessful. He can't tell me if the experience is in good shape or bad shape because he doesn't have the behind the scenes information of what myself and Jen and Nick and everybody are looking at, right?
Yeah, the motivations behind
without,
what
right, without that framework, it's just numbers.
Yeah.
So I thought this was an interesting topic because I know everybody looks at data differently. And some people hate it. Some people just hate this stuff. And I used to be that guy. And anymore, what I've learned about myself and what I've learned about the world is that if I'm that guy, I'm missing out on a ton of information that is incredibly important to my own well-being, to my own mental health, my own physical health, my own business health. And I think it's important to remember that whenever you see an article come out with data or opinions based on someone's data, that's their data and their opinion. Doesn't mean the sky is falling. It just means that person's is.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a factor you can take into consideration too, because that itself is a point of data that somebody's going to have an interpretation on this that could actually influence things for you in the butterfly effect of the way it's going to affect the industry.
Right. So last start comment. Interesting. Does the industry need to be disrupted? That's a good 2020s word. I wish people would stop saying they're going to disrupt the industry and then not, because that's a thing.
Stop trying to hit me and hit me.
Every month there's a new publisher or writer or someone going out there. Oh, we aim to disrupt what's happening. Well, guess what? We've had a ton of disruption since 2020 in this business, and we're still sorting out the rubble.
Yeah.
If you're going to really disrupt the business, do it.
Here's a hint. In the 80s and 90s, they said, shift the paradigm. That was the buzzword back then.
I hate buzzwords. Anyway, so thank you guys for being here. Thank you for everyone who participated in the comments. We will. Oh, Jay, I'm going to come through this computer right now. Anyway, we will be back next week with another topic. So for Bronze, I've been Kyle. For producer Jay, thank you everybody who's been here. We will see everybody next time. Everyone go listen to Weird Al's, just Weird Al music, because he has a song about that word too.
And tune in next Saturday for Small Business Saturday here on the XP.
Saturday. I knew I was going to forget something. Jay, take us out.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.